Greetings and felicitations.
Hip, hip, hurrah, tally-ho.
All right, we had to do it. We had to watch Casino Royale.
And what can we say?
Oh, we could thank Matt Sherman for that, because we weren't originally going to, but Matt encouraged us to, so tell you what. When I first watched this movie as a teenager, halfway through, I said, what the hell am I watching?
So you saw this as a teenager.
I saw it once, and I never saw it again until this review.
And now you know why.
Halfway during the movie, I said, what the hell am I watching? Boy, this definitely was a satire on Bond. I wouldn't necessarily say a comedy, but alright, let's get into the numbers and the facts. Had multiple directors: Ken Hughes, John Huston, Joseph McGrath, Robert Parrish, Val Guest, Richard Talmadge. How does that happen? How do you get so many directors for a movie? That in itself is weird,
It had several different plots, so they let each director put their own spin on it, which, might have sounded like a good idea to somebody at the time.
Produced by Charles K. Fieldman, Jerry Bressler. It was based on the original James Bond book by Ian Fleming entitled Casino Royale, which we know as being the first James Bond novel. All-star cast, though. Peter Sellers, Ursula Andress, to see her back again in a Bond movie was great. Barbara Boucher, David Niven, Woody Allen, early Woody Allen.
And he did a pretty good job in it.
I mean,
he played a comedy part.
He actually was. His parts were funny. Orson Welles was in there. It was released or distributed by Columbia Pictures and released April 13th, 1967 in London. Throughout the United States, took almost a month later, or over a month later, May 28th, 1967, the entire United States. It was over 2 hours long, 131 minutes.
Well, that was part of the problem. It was too long.
Yeah, if it was shorter, it would have been way better. Way better. There was a lot of filler in there. The budget was $12 million. The box office took in $41.7 million.
It was considered a success at the box office.
Unbelievable. So the story goes that they acquired the rights to Casino Royale because of a lot of paperwork. They couldn't make it an official Eon production, so they held on to it and just later on decided, hey, Bond is big, let's make a satire on Bond.
That when they, back when they made the first Bond movie, they had wanted to do Casino Royale, but they couldn't at the time. And so, later on, this movie was made.
Which is so curious. It's supposed to be James Bond coming out of retirement.
well, since the other Bond movies with Sean Connery had been established, they were hits. So it's like, well, why not do this spoof?
Mm-hmm.
So
that was the mentality behind it, and I mean, obviously, neither of us really enjoyed it. The length of the movie was just so long for this. You don't see comedies over 2 hours. I don't think there are any comedies that are over 2 hours long. Most comedies tend to run about an hour and a half, especially during this time period.
Right, and it wasn't just long, but it was such a convoluted, disjointed story.
It sure was. You want to talk about it?
Let's do it. Okay, what can we say? Okay, there were actually 8 James Bonds in the movie. I mean, as far as people who are supposed to be Bond of some sort, disguised as Bond, or is Bond, or his nephew and his daughter.
It was so weird.
So it was that, which, I mean, in a way, that could have been a good movie. It's not that the idea was bad, the execution was bad. Mm-hmm. And having 5 directors, and maybe they should have put it together as 5 separate stories instead of trying to put them in one story.
Little vignettes would have been way better. Now that you're saying that, it would make total sense.
Yes, because it was hard to follow the way it was, and it got hard to keep up with the characters, at least for me.
Oh, totally. There's a point where I just gave up. I was like, it's not even making sense.
So,
But there were gems in the movie. There were some parts that were worthwhile.
I mean, there were these little parts in the beginning with the woman and her other women that were working for her, and you're kind of going, well, this is funny. It's got the pretty ladies that are always in Bond movies, but now it's a whole slew of them. So it's an exaggeration of Bond, and we get that, and it was funny for a while.
You had the classic, you had tropes with Bond too, the classic casino scene.
Yes, they had that. So they had to do the Bond that plays Baccarat, which is a card game.
But that being said, Peter Sellers and Orson Welles apparently hated each other so much that they had to film those scenes at separate tables on different days with doubles standing in for the backs of the other actors because they refused to work together. Okay.
I mean, why even bother? Why couldn't they get different actors?
I often wonder about Hollywood personalities that are like that. I mean, can you imagine any normal person going to their job and saying, I hate this coworker so much that I'm only going to work an opposite shift? You know what your boss would say? Just shut up and do your job. Just
exactly.
You live your life when you leave. Like, it's so weird the dynamics.
But in this case, we're talking about stars, though, and they're more inclined to get what they want.
Yeah, it's. I don't get it, but that's just how it is.
So we have Miss Moneypenny in this one, played by Barbara Boucher, who was on Star Trek. She played Kalinda in By Any Other Name.
That's right.
And then we also have some uncredited people. Angelica Houston was in this. Oh, well, they used her hands. They used her as a hand model for some reason. David Prowse was uncredited, but he was supposedly in the movie as Frankenstein's monster.
Okay.
Amazing.
A Star Wars connection there.
Exactly. Oh, and I like just the name Smersh instead of Spectre. That was funny.
Good. That was funny.
It was funny.
But Ian Fleming had decided on David Niven to be the role of James Bond in Dr. No. So, I mean, this isn't too much of a stretch when you look at the history of Dr. No, and early on, like in a what if scenario. What if Casino Royale would have been the first aired motion picture for James Bond?
This was a good way to get, actors that they couldn't get for the other movies. I mean, yeah, it was a good idea in that way. And the movie was a financial success. I mean, a lot of people at that time liked it. I guess you had to live it during that time to enjoy it.
And that's what it is sometimes with older comedies. You have to be there for the moment because it's not as funny to modern audiences. So I'm chalking some of it up to the time period, what was viewed as comedy for that time period.
It could be that. And because Bond, was so popular at this time. I mean, he still is now, but back then there was only one James Bond in movies, and these movies were just taking off.
And apparently a lot of the actors thought that this was going to be a James Bond movie. They didn't realize it was a spoof. So they were in the dark. Can you imagine going to the premiere of this and them sitting through it saying, what in the world did I get myself into?
Oh, no way. There was, I mean, there have been other, later on, spoofs of Bond or spoofs of spy movies. Now, there's a movie called The Kingsman that's a more modern spy comedy, but also had a little bit of seriousness. That was much better. They pulled it off much better than this movie.
The Flint movies were better than this.
Yes,
and,
A Man Called Flint.
And of course the Austin Powers. I mean, if you were going to talk about spoof of spy movies, those are the ones that everyone is familiar with because they are constantly funny.
And even the one Deep Space Nine did, Our Man Bashir.
Oh, it was great. It
I loved
really
it.
was
Yes.
great. Mm-hmm. Yeah, James Bond fans have to check out the Star Trek spoof on James Bond, that episode, Our Man Bashir. But getting back to this movie, I think the shining part for me was Woody Allen scenes.
That's
and
what I would think
too. He came way
too.
at the end too.
Well, I like the fact that it turned out that he was the villain in the end.
Mm-hmm.
That was a nice little twist, and it in some ways it made the movie come together. So at least it had that. I mean, he's this doofus, you know, which is what Woody Allen does. And I can't say I'm really a fan of his, but in this movie it worked.
But you were busting out laughing when the girl was tied up. Oh yeah, I learned this in Boy Scouts.
Yes, that was funny. Yeah, see, there was some funny stuff in it.
There was.
The Smersh training rooms, which was in the scene with the Mata Hari Bond.
Mm-hmm.
That was interesting. For some reason, that made me think of Get Smart, which was a great comedy spy show. Yeah.
Yep. But I think overall, one of the redeeming qualities, we're going a little bit backwards, but the opening credits. The opening credits with music by Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass. I mean, it's a classic 60s sound to it. Beautiful imagery. And then the soundtrack by Burt Bacharach. So you have these two iconic, especially instrumentalists, in this bizarre movie. I think it worked so much. The soundtrack to it. I like the soundtrack more than I enjoyed the actual movie.
Well, that applies to a lot of movies. But yeah, the music was okay and it fit.
And it was of its time.
Right. And the James Bond guy that was supposed to be trained to resist women, that was pretty funny.
Mm-hmm.
That was another exaggeration of Bond. And these caricatures of Bond is what it's all about, because that's what you do with a spoof about James Bond. So doing him as the the handsome man, and then also with the Woody Allen part, the doofus nerdy kind of man. So they did both extremes of Bond.
And speaking about Woody Allen, apparently he was so flustered over the misdirection of all these directors that he found it frustrating that this is what inspired him to become a director going forward. Because he knew how not to run things. He wanted to show how to run things. So again,
yes,
something else good came out of this.
That is interesting.
And Woody Allen, Peter Sellers, they all, because of their background in comedy and improv, they were involved in writing certain scenes. Which makes you wonder, like, if they kept going on with these type of movies, like, who else would they have included? People like Robin Williams? More improv type comedy like that. How far could they have gone if they made one for different eras?
They could have done something. I mean, some of the lines in Airplane were improv.
Yeah.
And Airplane was great, as we talked about.
And Joan Collins was invited to take the role of Giovanna Goodthighs. She turned that down.
I wonder why.
Quite a few actors and actresses turned down things in this movie. I guess it was so weird. That's the best way I could describe this. In our run of Bond movies, this is by far the weirdest one we've watched.
I would rather go back to the other Bond movies. This one was so far off the wall, and not in a good way.
Hello, StarPod log fans. Matt Sherman here from BondFanEvents.com, talking about the wonderful, glorious mess that is the film Casino Royale 1967. Many of you, your first introduction to the film was on this podcast today. It's a fascinating piece of kitsch. It's a fascinating piece of 1960s culture. It's wonderful, it's glorious in its design, in its style. I mean, you're talking about Paco Rabanne doing costume design, and Burt Bacharach and Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass doing the soundtrack. It's actually one of the best of all the James Bond soundtracks, and recently archivists have put out a special double album including long lost tracks and lyrics to some of the songs. Wonderful music. Everyone knows The Look of Love as performed by Dusty Springfield on the Casino Royale soundtrack album. It's been covered by dozens and dozens of artists. It's an all-time classic. So wonderful, crazy, fun music. What's going on with this film? Well, normally at this point in the podcast, I would compare the film for you to the Ian Fleming novel. Why? Because this film is a total takeoff and just really satirizes the Bond films that had come before. Dr. No, From Russia with Love, Goldfinger, and Thunderball. it also adds a lot of inside jokes on Ian Fleming things. It's just a crazy, mixed up mess. The humor is intense. The film is loaded with starlets and beautiful women. Arguably, and we've discussed this at some of my events, Casino Royale 67 might be the film with the most beautiful Bond women. Joanna Pettit, Deborah Kerr, Jacqueline Bisset in her very first film appearance. Barbara Boucher is a desirable, beautiful, and wonderful Miss Moneypenny. She was a guest at our fan convention in San Francisco back in 2002, and we had a wonderful time with her and with her family in attendance as she joined our other Bond stars there. And she had a lot of great stories to tell about the production. What happened with this film? Why is it such a departure from the Eon films? Why is it a crazy comedy? Very simply, Ian Fleming had a lifelong issue with money. He had money anxiety. He grew up part of a wealthy family where his father had passed, and his mother was tied to a Victorian or Edwardian era will, where if she got remarried, she would lose her inheritance. So she took lovers instead. And young Ian, and then older Ian was on a trust fund, but with his mom dispensing funds. So there were times when Ian Fleming fell in love and wanted to get married, and his mom said, "I'll cut you off," and put tremendous pressure on him to do what he didn't want to do. And so as the Bond novels began to explode in sales, his royalties per book were relatively very little, even compared to today in a tight economy. And he had money anxiety. He wrote TV scripts. He was trying to make the Bond books films early on, and Casino Royale was sold as a one-off. A producer picked up just the first Bond novel, Casino Royale, eventually came to the hands of producer Charles K. Feldman, and he executed his rights to this screen adaptation of Ian Fleming's first novel. And most consider the film's plots and subplots incomprehensible. Let's take a few minutes and talk about it. You see, the mess was compounded because Feldman was trying to capture the lightning in a box office bottle of his What's New Pussycat. Like Casino Royale 67, Pussycat featured Peter Sellers, Peter O'Toole, Woody Allen, Ursula Andress. Indeed, there's so many A-listers in large roles or really quick cameos in Casino Royale 67, it's almost easier to say who's not in the film. And Charles Feldman, the producer, did beautifully at the Pussycat box office by having it be a comedy improv film. It was ahead of its time, and he took several teams of writers and talent, including, like I said, Woody Allen, put them in cells, not communicating with one another, to make parts of the film in isolation and with improvisation. And in a similar process on Casino Royale, it was much harder to keep it coherent. He had 5 different directors, and then for part-time, a 6th director working on 5 and 6 pieces of this film. A good half hour of it is probably on the cutting room floor somewhere, but it still clocks in at nearly 3 hours. And he had actor divas fighting with each other on the set, giant cost overruns, and people working on retainer. Peter Sellers knew he'd be a James Bond character in the film for a year, and he practiced the cat-like walk and walking with grace and moving like Sean Connery. And he does a very reputable job, I think, because he's a master character actor, and he makes a pretty good James Bond. And other actors were on paid retainer for a year and so on. And so the film is a mess where in the editing room they had to try and tie together all these plots and subplots. So we can break the film down into 9 sections. Let me tell you about them briefly. This will be a great podcast to keep at hand when you watch the film, because it is worth watching if you can get through it. And to be honest, it's one of my favorite Bond films. It's got a lot of laughs, a lot of great acting in it, a lot of clever comedic touches, beautiful sets. They spent a lot of money on this film. So, with most of the world's secret agents murdered, Sir James Bond, a superhuman athlete, an abstemious, abstinent aesthete, is lured from retirement by all the secret services of the world because the agents are getting killed. And even a note from Her Majesty fails to inspire him, so M simply has Bond's home obliterated. Section 2, M is killed by the mortars used on Bond's home, although in deleted scene he's held prisoner instead. Bond pays his respects to M's widow and M's many beautiful daughters, young, gorgeous, in M's Scottish castle, and the women are all enemy agents trying to seduce Bond to sap his power. It's a sort of Samson and Delilah thing. But Bond resists using superhuman strength, and has a battle of wits and wills with bodyguards. In the 3rd section, Bond replaces the past M And he sees the need to reform the 00 section and insists on naming every agent left in the world, plus every new agent, because they need to fill the places of agents that have been murdered. He says, let's call them all James Bond 007. This confuses the enemy, but also the audience, and ever since. In Section 4, Vesper Lynd recruits the repressed car genius Evelyn Tremble. That's Peter Sellers, the famous comedian who did so many wonderful films, the Pink Panthers films, you know. And recruits Evelyn Tremble to gamble high against Le Chiffre at the Casino Royale. But first, Evelyn's going to cosplay as Napoleon, Toulouse-Lautrec, and Hitler in Vesper Lynd's bedroom, because Vesper Lynd is a double, triple spy and one of the wealthiest women in the world and owns entire empires. So now we move to the midpoint of the film where Bond recruits his love child. Bond has a child. That's an idea that originated with Fleming, by the way, and we may see that again in an upcoming film or two. But Bond recruits his love child, Mata Bond, because her mother was Mata Hari, the famous World War I spy. And Mata's first mission gives up her mother's secrets behind the Iron Curtain. She's kidnapped by the Queen's Horse Guard. She's brought to a flying saucer that lands in Trafalgar Square. Yes, the same Trafalgar Square we can see totally or partially in about a dozen Bond films. And then Mata Bond is flown to the Smersh lair. It's not Spectre, but Smersh. And she's flown to a deadly lair beneath the magnificent Casino Royale. The Casino Royale of the film is the Casino di Monte Carlo in Monaco, and that casino has also appeared in Never Say Never Again with Sean Connery and GoldenEye with Pierce Brosnan, a magnificent place. Now we move to the climax of the film where Evelyn Tremble duels at Chemin de Fer Baccarat with Le Chiffre, Orson Welles. In between Le Chiffre's magic trick performances and philosophical musings and psychedelic effects, audio and visual, it's like watching a drug scene unfold. In real life, Orson Welles was a master magician, and they worked that into the plot, and it's very amusing. Well, Tremble wins, but is murdered by Vesper Lynd. Then she, Bond's nephew Jimmy Bond, and Smersh fight MI6 Golden Girls, applauding sea lions, Charles Boyer, William Holden, and the U.S. Cavalry in a battle royale that ends in an atomic explosion at Casino Royale and sends 7 James Bonds to heaven and Woody Allen's Jimmy Bond to hell. Wow! That's all on the screen. And again, to appreciate this film, thrilled to its stellar cast, its costumes, its music, and a barrage of jokes. What kind of jokes do we get in Casino Royale that are really wild and interesting in unique ways, I think? Well, first of all, you get a line like this because Q's laboratory, in one of the coolest inside jokes in the film, is in the Harrods basement in the giant department store and shopping mall and eatery in London. And so you take the elevator, an extra flight down to the sub-basement, you're in Q's laboratory, and the staff brings Evelyn Tremble as James Bond 007 for his battle at Casino Royale, a special outfit, special gear. And they tell him it is, of course, sand fries, so non-iron, and also available in chocolate, oyster, or clerical grey. And it's hand-reefed and double-charvered. And Peter Sellers says, is it? What? We're used to Bond wearing 3-piece suits and tuxedos, or in the books being a little bit more casual, but still elegant sartorially. And what in the heck is a sand fries double-charvered? Sand frising is a mechanical finishing process. How you treat textile fabrics to prevent the normal dimensional alternation of warp, weft. It's a process of treatment for cotton fabrics and some other textiles made from natural or synthetic fibers. So back in the 60s, that was kind of a thing. Your clothes had been sand frised. Double charvered? What in the world is that? I know Bond fans like me who were trying to figure that out for years. Charvered is British slang. That's one of its meanings. A young person who wears brash sportswear or designer sportswear. Usually they have a low social status. They're big lout. They're big, brash, and noisy snob. So it's hand-reefed, whatever the heck that means, and double-charvered. It's nonsense. They just spout off nonsense, but they do it with a straight face. They do it so dryly. And it's just wonderful. So Casino Royale adheres to the Bond style and the Bond theme, if you will, of Bond being this super cool dude. Why is he super cool? Because his outfit with his poison pen capsule and all its gadgets is available in 3 different colors. It's sand fries, you don't need an iron, it's hand reefed, and it's double charvered. And these jokes just come at you nonstop. And because it's 5 different directors and they're working on the script while they're filming this mess, they have every kind of humor. It's not just that kind of slick, erudite, Monty Python-esque verbal humor. There's slapstick. So in the same scene, someone gets knocked on the head, and that's supposedly for a laugh. And we have car chases. And we have the UFO chase, if you will. Crazy stuff. And we have Woody Allen doing his thing. So Woody Allen has stood up before a firing squad, and he does this kind of nebbishy, you can't shoot me at the firing squad because the doctor said I can't let bullets into my body at any time. And Woody Allen uses a trick cigarette just before the next Bond. You Only Live Twice used a trick rocket cigarette. He escapes his captors. He jumps up over the wall where the firing squad was going to shoot him. He goes, ha, suckers. And as he jumps over the wall, he lands inside another firing squad. That kind of Woody Allen humor is in the film as well. And again, these marvelous cameos, my friends, as you watch this film, you're going to see Vladek Sheybal, who is Kronstein in From Russia with Love. He plays a villain, and he has an amazing end in the film. And of course, Orson Welles was a good Lashif, a very believable, menacing kind of cross between Emilio Largo and the Lashif of the Fleming novel. So really wild stuff. You're going to see amazing cast of characters parading through. And you're going to get some Scottish Bond as well, between the bagpipes and the Scottish castle and the haggis and the Tappenhead of Uskaba that they drink. It's just wild. If you really get into the film as I have, you'll be looking stuff up on the internet for years trying to figure this stuff out. Casino Royale is worth a watch. It's definitely worth a watch in the chronological order between Thunderball and You Only Live Twice, to get a handle on the culture and the humor. And if you've read Ian Fleming, you'll get a lot of the inside jokes. And there's also wonderful jokes against the Eon official, if you will, series, even though this is an official licensed Bond film. You're going to see a fight scene, and all of a sudden, very randomly in the middle of the fight scene, there's Golden Girls and a photographer taking a picture of the Golden Girls. Of course, they're punning on the movie Goldfinger and so on. It's a really wild, wonderfully soundtrack mess of a film. A lot of fun. The scenes behind the Iron Curtain are absolutely wonderful. The scenes where they're bidding on the compromising films of the spies, which again, that's the plot of From Russia with Love. They're going to do a compromising film of James Bond. And the Asian contingent says, we stand, we bid, we sit, we no bid. And then the British contingent says, well, if it's okay with you, we'll sort of do a change between standing and sitting, if that's all right. There's these jokes, and they're coming so fast and thick that if you blink or take a breath, you'll miss a joke. Really wild film to watch. Enjoy it. Watch the heck out of it. I've seen it multiple times. It's not a lot of fans' cup of tea, but if you get into it, it's a real pleasure and a guilty pleasure. So I'm looking forward to meeting with you again as we continue our look at the Bond films together with StarPod Log, the next film being You Only Live Twice. And if you're checking out BondFanEvents.com, we just announced about a week ago a trip to Cairo, Egypt. We have planned that coincident with an Israel tour, but fans need not go on both. They can go one or the other. And we do have a tour planned for February. We're hoping that the travel restrictions will have eased. And even just in this past week, we had about 13 people sign up to tour Cairo, Egypt with Janine Sherman and me and visit Bond locations in person from The Spy Who Loved Me. Check us out at BondFanEvents.com. Thanks for enjoying StarPod Log, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the Force be with you. Nanu Nanu.